you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sophia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. Before we start today, please take a moment to rate the podcast. So many of you all have already gone and done this, so thank you so much for that. And I would like to mention that we are posting the full video on YouTube. So if you would like to watch this episode on YouTube, I do highly recommend it. We have some incredible guest speakers. Yes, speakers plural. So if you guys want to take the opportunity to go to YouTube and watch it there, this is the time to do that. This episode is sponsored by Big Tex Ordnance, your soon-to-be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high-quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre- and post-sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports instructors nationwide. They do this so that when you call as the consumer, you are taken care of. Thank you so much to BTO. Let's go ahead and get into it. Today, we are talking about the Tactical Anatomy Summit. If you all haven't heard of this, hang on tight. This is going to be an incredible episode. We have guest speakers today, Chuck Haggard, Andy Anderson, Troy Miller, and Steve Moses. And today, the interview style is going to be slightly different because we have so many. As they answer questions on today's podcast, they are going to introduce themselves beforehand so that you all have some context for who's speaking. We had a pre-show chat, and guys, I'm telling you, this episode it's going to be so cool. And I know what I'm doing in November now. So let's go ahead and get into it. Chuck, I would love for you to start us off with what the Tactical Anatomy Summit is, if you don't mind.
Okay, so the genesis of this was started actually back late 80s, early 90s. Dr. James Williams came up with the concept of tactical anatomy. He's an emergency room doc and an avid shooter and big game hunter. Multiple trips to places like Gunsight and things like that people will recognize as really legitimate firearms training. He also did ER work and what you would think of nowadays as like SWAT medic work, police medic work, back before that was as popular a thing as it is now. And so he came up with the idea of tactical anatomy after there was an incident where an officer was killed in a gunfight. And he wanted to try and do something to maybe make sure that doesn't happen again, or, do his best to keep something like that from happening again. So his concept of tactical anatomy would be sort of the reverse of first aid, in that teaching officers how to shoot effectively so that their bullets actually work as quickly as possible and shut down the bad guy. In a lot of scenarios we could think of, some very dramatic ones, like an active shooter event, you may have multiple victims, mass casualty event, things like that. Under the TCCC concept, the best thing you can do for first aid for the victims is shut the bad guy down first. And then nobody has to worry about doing first aid or doing care under fire, getting shot in the back while you're trying to stop a bleeder or apply a tourniquet, things like that. So on a microcosm, Doc Williams' idea was for self-defense people, concealed carry people, for working cops, if you're confronted with a bad guy, the best thing for everybody involved is to shut that bad guy down as quickly as possible, the best you can, and with the fewest possible shots fired, while still making an effective defensive firearms use. So I first went to his class, his instructor school, sometime in the mid-90s, and being an active working ER doc and then having a teaching schedule and things like that, I think got a little bit burnout, got a little bit overworked. And some of his work was not, quite frankly, as appreciated as it should have been. That this wasn't a cool run and gun class and things like that. There's a lot of learning and actual classroom stuff involved in the class that he does. So he kind of laid off doing tactical anatomy instructor for a number of years, I think at least a decade. And myself and a few other people badgered him until he agreed to come back and teach classes. And we brought the tactical anatomy instructor back to Meade Hall Range in Oklahoma City, where I believe each of the other gentlemen has attended. Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but each of you has been to the Meade Hall class at some point. I was privileged, I was honored to be asked by Doc to teach a wound ballistics portion as far as projectile, ammunition selection and what to expect from things like FBI protocol ammunition and that sort of thing. And we've done that a couple of times now. And so going forward in the Tactical Anatomy Summit that Steve set up and asked me and the other gentleman to assist with would be the same sort of learning objectives with other things, more practical app applied to that outside the scope of, as you can imagine, Tactical Anatomy Instructor would have a very, I don't want to say narrow, but it's got a very specific course of instruction for that material. And then for the summit, what we can do is have more of a user level thing going on and then expand on those topics so that people could attend the summit and learn a wide variety of stuff, including tactical anatomy and some first aid and care under fire, things like that.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like an incredible time, and I feel so honored to have you back on the podcast, Chuck, just because I want to make sure we get you introduced. For those of you that have not heard the episode that Chuck Haggard has come on for already, Chuck, would you mind introducing yourself a bit?
So my involvement in this specific subject would be because I'm in my 36th year of law enforcement. I did 28 years, one career full-time. At a very busy department, 17, almost 18 years as a SWAT officer, firearms instructor, and then part of one of the jobs that we had, because a lot of what we did, we had to wear more than one hat, was I was involved in our use of force review and what people would think of as a shooting review board, if everybody's familiar with that from watching cop shows. And that I was a member of, an investigator, and at one point the chair of our shooting review and our use of force review board. Worked a very busy schedule on the street and attended a lot, unfortunately, a lot of shootings, a lot of homicides. And I've had a lifelong interest in I'm a propeller head as far as ballistic nerdery. Terminal ballistics along with internal and external ballistics. I was previously a long-range shooter. I was a sniper on my team for a while. So all of that stuff where bullets interact with the environment, I'm a nerd for. I've done quite a bit of ballistics gelatin testing and networked with people from like the FBI Ballistics Research Unit. I'm friends with Dr. Gary Roberts. I was previously a member of, sadly, the organization is no longer with us because Dr. Fackler is deceased, but I was a member of the International Wound Ballistics Association for a number of years while that was still going. So my party I have far less education than the other gentlemen on this podcast, and my contribution would be more where the rubber meets the road and where the bullets hit the gelatin, as it were.
Wow. Mic drop. That was a very... Did you plan that?
Sometimes
so cool.
I have no idea what words are going to come out of my face.
I love that. No, same. I think we're all in that boat for sure. The only difference is I get to listen to myself later on and hear it all of the time. So the joys of being a podcast host. But anyway, so Chuck, thank you so much for your introduction. And since I have you, because we have so many incredible topics to cover today, one kickoff I think would be really interesting is to maybe cover some common misconceptions about handgun calibers and their effectiveness in defensive situations. I know as someone who represents a lot of the female side of concealed carry and self-defense, I will sometimes have women, for example, start with a 22 because, 9mm is scary for them. And then they end up purchasing, their first firearm as a 380. And then I'll get internet people who say that that's not technically a defensive round. And there's just so much I feel like, misinformation around the topic. And I would love for you to speak on that today, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
So because people watch too many movies and TV, the perception is out there that bullets are some sort of death ray, particularly with handguns. That is far from the truth. I know people that work in facilities like Andy do, where they have a lot of gunshot victims come in. The stats all over the place in ERs and level 1 trauma centers, things like that, is if you are hit by a handgun bullet, regardless of caliber, and you show up and have a guy like Andy work on you, 9 out of 10 times you're going to walk out of that facility at some point. So handguns tend to not be very lethal, and they are just not very powerful. Rifles and shotguns are different animals, and I mean real rifles, like the kind of thing you would hunt deer with, or 12 gauge shotguns, things like that. Clint Smith has a very famous rant about what shotguns do to people. I could tell you that I have seen pieces of people stuck to a wall, laying on the floor, stuck to the ceiling. Had a bad homicide one time that unfortunately was a domestic. The male half ambushed his ex, and one of her arms was amputated off of her body by a close range shotgun blast of a birdshot, which I am told doesn't work on people, but I have seen evidence to the contrary. So as far as defensive handgunnery, what caliber is far less important than your ability to shoot the gun, place those hits very accurately, and then having a bullet that penetrates sufficiently to get the job done. I will tell you that one of the things that I noticed in my nerdery is what was the most commonly issued combat pistol caliber of the First World War? Anybody? 32 automatic.
That's what I was going to say.
32 ACP was by far the most common combat pistol caliber that was issued to the various armies involved in the First World War. I've done ballistic gelatin testing with standard 32 automatic 71, 73 grain ball. And what it does is has enough velocity to poke a bullet through very heavy clothing. Like, you remember they wore the old great coats back in the day, and the wool clothing and things like that. It'll poke a bullet through that type of barrier and then come to rest somewhere between 16 and 18 inches in a block of ballistic gelatin. And typically the bullet will yaw, so at some point it's sideways, which of course cuts a bigger hole. So in the experience back then, it was thought to be a decently effective handgun caliber. I can tell you I've seen people walking and talking that had 45 holes in them and 40 caliber holes in them. And I have seen people, as Pat Rogers used to famously say, turned into canoes by things like 22s, 25s, 32s, 380s. So what you hit with your pistol bullet is vastly more important than what pistol bullet that is. That said, we do know that bigger bullets tend to penetrate better, something like a 9mm 124 grain, good quality jacket, a hollow point like a Gold Dot or HST. It's a very reliable bullet as far as staying on track if you apply it accurately, whereas sometimes 22s will hit bone and then kind of take off at an angle. The incident where Ronald Reagan was famously shot by John Hinckley is an example of that, where the 22 caliber bullet that Reagan was hit with hit a rib and took off at an angle instead of at the straight line that it was aimed in at. Partially saved his life as far as that goes. But all pistol bullets basically poke holes. They don't have temporary cavitation that's significant. There's no shock waves or knockdown power or any of that in play. So if you think of a pistol bullet as something like a sharpened dowel rod that you poke people with, and now you can apply that at distance, that's basically what pistol bullets do. So the whole purpose of the training that we talk about with our Summit and Doc Williams and that sort of thing is how to apply those bullets best to shut the bad guy down as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for that thorough response. Something I have found recently is that the only class so far in my experience as a student and instructor where we have talked about placement was my Tom Givens instructor development course. And, that makes sense. It's an instructor development course where we're getting into the weeds. But I was kind of disappointed to find that no instructor before has ever gone into this with me. And I'm excluding workshops where, instructors go into their very niche topic, like in a pepper spray course, something like that. I'm talking about defensive pistol courses that I've taken from renowned instructors, and we've never talked about this. Would you say that's something pretty common, and is that something that you've witnessed yourself?
Quite a bit. And then in my history in police work, I've seen a lot of things like the old B-27 targets and that sort of thing, where the target is actually a contributor to induce people to shoot at the wrong point if your scoring ring is a wrong point of this silhouette target, there's targets that are out there that basically very famously induce you to shoot lower than you probably should. I don't know if Tom mentioned it in the class that you were in, but he thinks one of his great achievements was when he helped stand up IDPA. He insisted that they move the down zero zone up higher in the chest because it was at true center mass, and where we want to hit bad guys to shut them down isn't quote unquote center mass, but a area north of there on the human body. So he considers one of his big victories in life being have that target to be anatomically correct. So the IDPA target's a great example of a really good training target because of Tom's input. And then there's others out there, like Kyle Lamb famously has his VTAC kind of skeleton target. That's a pretty good one. But there's a lot of targets out there that people use for defensive training that are actually very poorly designed and induce the shooter to fire into the wrong spots. So that's part of the training that we talk about doing here in this group and with Talk Williams and other people that I work with. But I have in the past seen exactly what you're talking about as far as instructors not addressing in defensive handgunnery what is a very important topic, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. And for the listener, if you're a student and you've yet to learn this, this would be a great place to start by going to this summit. And just for anyone listening so far, I meant to say this in the very beginning, I will have all of the summit information along with how to get into contact with each of our guest speakers in the show notes, which are the notes below the title. So fear not, you can directly access that link and look into the course as we speak today. I know I like to do some research while I listen to things, multitask, even though I'm not really doing both things well, but moving on. I believe that's a great segue. I would love to ask Dr. Andy Anderson what the most common gunshot wound patterns you've observed in the emergency room are and how they've impacted the medical treatment and survival of the patient, I guess, if you don't mind.
Hey, my name's Andy Anderson. Before I got into medical school, I was a paramedic for a number of years, and I've been practicing in the emergency department now for 21 years at a level 1 trauma center. So I have 30 years of treating gunshot wounds. And it's like Chuck said, the handgun rounds are fairly wimpy. Placement really is important. I have seen people killed with 22, 38, 380s, had a child killed with a BB gun because it actually went into the heart. So placement is very important. And also to add what Chuck is saying, I've been to a number of classes, especially beginner classes, and the targets, in my opinion, are to reinforce positive behavior of getting shots on target, not necessarily where they need to go, but at least not missing the bad guy, but putting shots on target. And unfortunately, a lot of people stop their training after their first introductory class. and they scored a passing grade. Then you look at a trauma center where I work, and people come in and they are shot everywhere. I believe my highest round count is one patient came in with 17 shots on his body, and he came in sitting up, talking, and was asking for his cell phone because none of them were in the anatomically important areas. So as far as where people are shot, they were literally shot everywhere. And at a level 1 trauma center, it's very fortunate for the patients that come to me because I know for a fact that more than one time we've had patients from the ER into the operating room within less than 10 minutes. So that's another reason why the survival rate is so high as medical advancement. But as far as where people are shot, I've seen them shot everywhere. And placement really is important.
Absolutely. And do you find that they're super surprised that they've been shot and they're not dead? Have you gotten feedback from them? I'm just kind of curious.
One of two things. Sometimes they don't realize that they have been shot because they're in a fight and they don't realize that they were shot. They thought they were just hit with a really strong punch or something like that. Sometimes they come in and they're shot someplace where they can see the blood, and the blood is what lets them know they've been shot, and they don't realize they've been shot in other places. So one of the questions I always ask the medical students and new interns every year is, what is the most common missed gunshot wound? And the answer is the second gunshot wound. The obvious one everybody sees and focuses on, and they forget to look about the other gunshot wound, and even sometimes the patient doesn't realize that they were shot in the second or third or fourth location.
That is incredible. I mean, as far as I would have never guessed that, I love what Chuck said earlier about how there's no, I think you said electric pulse or something that, comes out of the bullet, once it's lodged into you or anything like that. But that is something that at least I think of, or I thought of before I was kind of met with the reality that first of all, will take more than one shot most of the time, and also placement. And I know I've told this story on other episodes, so if the listener's hearing this again, I'm so sorry, but just buckle in really quick. So I was at Craig Douglas's ECQC course, and I was training with a gentleman much larger than me, and I'm 5'10", so that's sometimes hard to beat. And definitely gave me a run for my money during grappling. But I had to shoot some sim rounds into him during training, and I remember I shot him once, and I stopped, and I was like, I looked at Craig, and I was like, why didn't he go down? And Craig was like, he's still coming at you. Come on. And I had to put like 7 more rounds into this guy until he stopped. And I was so thankful for that, because all I'd ever trained was one shot, because this was so early into my training. I had taken a basic pistol course, and then I took my concealed carry license, class, which I wore proudly. And then I went to ECQC. So that was my first introduction into that. I know. With that said, and on the same topic, this isn't actually something I planned to ask, but since we're talking about round count, so placement is, from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, placement is the most important thing. But would you say that in a defensive situation, when you're firing rounds, would it be best to put I hate to say as many as possible in that same spot, but is there a certain round count that you should maybe consider if you're firing in a sequence where you're able to kind of take some steps back or anything like that?
I would say no, because every person every bad guy's different. They're physically different. Is it a 120-pound meth head strung out trying to attack you who is high on chemicals? Is it a 450-pound guy who's determined to do bad things to you? So once again, your ammunition needs to do what you think it's supposed to do, but then you also have to hit the correct anatomical spots. Some people they become bullet sponges. They just suck up the bullets. They've got so much adrenaline, or they're so psychotic, or they're so high on whatever drugs that they're using, the rounds just don't affect them. So I would never say a set number.
Right. And for those wondering what an accurate depiction of our anatomy would be to train on, are there any targets that you've seen that have really spoken to you, or ones that you use for personal defense training? I
like the VTAC targets, but something that will really show the anatomy is probably good. And David, can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Handgun Combatives.
Oh yeah,
David Spalding. Dave Spalding uses a 3x5 card, and a 3x5 card in the center of the chest is great because it has the heart, the great vessels, and it really focuses you in on the center part of the chest where you need to be hitting.
Absolutely.
So,
are you searching for a brand you can trust when it comes to shooting and gun care products? Look no further than Birchwood Casey. Since 1948, serious shooters, avid collectors, and professional gunsmiths have relied on Birchwood Casey. They've been in the game for over 70 years, providing us with products that have stood the test of time. From their legendary True Oil gunstock finish to the dependable Perma Blue, Birchwood Casey's commitment to quality is unmatched. Birchwood Casey has also revolutionized the way we train and improve our shooting skills with their innovative Shoot and See targets. These targets let you see your shots instantly, making it easier than ever to track your progress and become a better marksman. Head over to birchwoodcasey.com today and discover the products that have earned the trust of shooters worldwide. And use code SheShield20 to save 20% on your order and to support the podcast. Again, that's SheShield20, SHESHIELD 20 at checkout. Happy shooting. I believe I met him at a course. Oh no, he's a different individual. Okay, sorry, never mind. That was a little side tangent. And would you say that I know I commonly hear or see people do a drill where it's 2 shots to the body, 1 to the head. What would you have to say about that repetition of training for a defensive situation?
I think it's challenging. The head's a hard spot to hit. Person is moving. If you have hit them in the chest 2 times, they may be responding either by falling, turning, to automatically go 2 shots to the body and 1 to the head. I would not do that as an automatic. That was designed for a specific reason. If someone's wearing body armor and you're not getting through, then that would probably be a reason to change your targeting to the head. But I don't teach that as an automatic self-defense response.
Absolutely. I've always wondered about that. It might just be one of those things that looks cool. I mean, it's impressive anytime someone can, take a shot to a smaller area,
and it is impressive. It is a great training modality because one day you may have to do that. So transitioning from a larger chest area to a smaller head area, it is a training technique and something that you may have to use one day, but it's not something that I would teach that this is what you're going to do in your self-defense encounter.
Sophia,
Absolutely.
I think part of the reason that, that it became popularized by Jeff Cooper after a famous incident with one of his students occurred in Mozambique, which is where it got the nickname Mozambique drill, or what we call failure to stop failure drill. But if you think of defensive handguns back in the day, they were fairly low capacity. That was the most common. Most of your cops carried revolvers. A lot of people still carry, the Air Force still issued revolvers. The go-to defensive handgun back then was a 1911, which was a single stack, 7-round magazine. You got an 8th round in the chamber. So I know a lot of people nowadays who wouldn't consider carrying a gun with that low a capacity, and that was standard for armed professionals back in the day, and it was considered very sufficient. I think we also had higher shooting standards that guys like Jeff Cooper wanted to get people up to. And like I know in the police world, it was common to qualify out to the 50-yard line, which is unheard of nowadays. So we were expected to shoot accurately, and we were also expected to not burn through all our ammo in spray and pray, or accuracy through volume, that sort of thing. So the idea of the controlled pair was what Jeff Cooper came up with. And you would hit the guy a couple of times, maybe hit him a couple of times again. And then the idea was, if that didn't work, it's time to change channels and go to something else. Maybe he's got body armor. Maybe he's not impressed with your bullets, that sort of thing. So part of what we teach in tactical anatomy is alternative aiming points for if you need to go for a brain shot, if you need to go for a pelvis shot, if you have a failure to stop, if you have body armor, that sort of thing. How do you visualize these alternative anatomical areas that would also be effectively targeted by defensive pistol bullets? But the history of what you're talking about, you have to kind of know some of it. I hope that contextualizes that for you.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is there are other locations than upper chest to shoot at, but you need the context, the anatomical context. It's not always the headshot. There are other things that are viable solutions that you all implement into your training. Yes,
absolutely. And it's entirely scenario dependent. One of my mentors that I was blessed to train with was Jim Cirillo, famously of the NYPD Stakeout Squad. He had 19 gunfights as a New York Stakeout Squad officer. And they accidentally discovered in their shootouts that going for the pelvis can be an effective, when applied correctly, can be an effective place to put shots on a bad guy. And they only did that because back then they weren't allowed to have jacketed hollow points at all. They were worried about the angle and it's New York City, it's crowded. So they're worried about, well, if I shoot this bad guy and my bullet goes all the way through, it could go blocks down range and hit this bystander. So if I change my angle of fire, then, because rule 4 is always a thing, be sure of your target, what's beyond your target, what's in between you and the target. So they just on the fly, because they were experienced guys, they would use an alternative targeting method because that changed the angle of their fire and made it safer for the bystanders. So that could be part of your decision-making process, is what's my background, that sort of thing. And it could apply to a lot more than just stakeout squad guys. Claude Warner tells us in his research that in home invasion shootings, defensive shootings, about 40% of the time, there's another family member either on the other side or in between you and the bad guy. So what we would think of as maybe hostage rescue or SWAT type scenario shooting can easily apply in the front door of your own home.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's also something that is new to me conceptually, just kind of scary since I've carried a gun for the past few years, but absolutely. So what I'm hearing is that this summit and your teachings, all of your teachings, are for everyone from civilian to law enforcement to military. Is that correct?
Yes. It's for anybody that carries a firearm. Wonderful. Defensively.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for those amazing answers. I know I'm learning so much. Oh, yes, please.
Let me add one thing. If you are a firearm instructor and you feel you have a duty to teach your students to be as effective as possible, I think this would be a great course to take as a foundation before you take Dr. Williams's Tactical Anatomy Instructor course. Just like a lot of courses in medicine, ACLS, ATLS, PALS, you have to take the course, and then take the instructor course. It wouldn't really make sense to take the instructor course without ever having a foundation to build on. I think this would be a great thing for firearms instructors who's wanting to get this information across to their students, to take this and then sign up for Dr. Williams' instructor course. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. I know this year is a pretty busy year. I'm excited to tell my husband that this is, I'm going to be like, I'll be right back in November because I've got to go to this now. Because I truly, before talking with you all and even that small bit of the Tom Givens course, because he has so much to cover, there's no way he could have gone into the detail that you all will be able to in the summit. I really didn't know what I didn't know. I got into USPSA. I thought that was naturally the next step to get better with just firearms skills. And then that started the discussion of, is that really applicable to self-defense? And then I got into other things like, weapons-based entanglement. But as far as anatomy and how that plays a part in the effectiveness of carrying that firearm and utilizing the firearm, I'm truly just now branching into that. So if you're listening and you feel behind on that, you're not alone, but this is a great start, this episode, and then meeting me at the summit. So I would love to pivot. There's a term that you all have on the description of the course, which is Zones of Effective Neutralization. That sounds super cool. So I think this would be a great time to go into that. I believe, Mr. Miller, this is your topic for today. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us what that means, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Troy Miller. I am a twice retired person, both from a 30-year career in emergency medicine. I am a retired emergency medicine physician, and a law enforcement career where I was a SWAT medic and served on 2 different law enforcement SWAT teams in Tyler, Texas, the cities that I live in, which is Tyler, and the county, which is Smith. So both the city and county's team. I went through the Counter-Narcotic and Tactical Operation Medical Support course, which is a course put on by the Department of Defense, and became a certified tactical medic. Spent 10 years on a pretty active team. The city's team was pretty active. The county's team was a little less so, but we tried to bring them up to speed. But as far as the question you asked, that's my brief introduction that you asked for.
Yes, thank you. And I meant to say Dr. Miller. I apologize.
Quite all right.
You earned that. So.
Oh, not to worry. The zones of incapacitation. There are 3 different ways that we can shut off a human body. One is a neurologic stop, where we can disrupt the central nervous system. That's the brain and the spinal cord. We can also reduce blood pressure by putting enough holes in the vascular system that the blood pressure no longer gives oxygenated blood to the brain, so it has no fuel to run on. The brain needs a constant supply of 2 things to work. One is glucose and one is oxygen. If it has an interruption of either of those, it doesn't work. So you can shut somebody off that way. And the other one is a psychological stop, which is the equivalent of, ow, that hurt, I quit. That's not one we want to rely on, obviously. So the zones of incapacitation, the fastest way to reduce blood pressure is to put rounds, either through the great vessels, which we term the great vessels are the vessels that bring blood into and out of the heart. You put holes through those, you can't deliver oxygenated blood to the brain, and the person goes to sleep. The central nervous system, if you can directly destroy enough of that, if you can destroy enough brain or sever the spinal cord, you can stop the electrical impulses that make the person who you're trying to stop unable to get their thoughts to their muscles in order to have them work. So the zones that we're talking about, primarily the upper chest, where the heart and great vessels live. That's the easiest place to hit, but it takes a little time for that process to work. As Andy mentioned earlier, the head is a great place to disrupt and shut off a person, but it's a very, very small target, usually moving, and difficult to hit. So while it works very well, accomplishing that is not easy. The third zone of incapacitation, which was mentioned earlier, is the pelvis. If you can hit the structures, the bony structures of the pelvis, you can put somebody on the ground and make them much easier to ventilate in a way that makes them bleed significantly or sufficiently to stop them from doing what they were trying to do to you. That's in my opinion, a vastly third choice. It's a bad first or second choice. But if it's all you have, it's all you have. So that would be a very quick discussion of the three zones of incapacitation: the high upper chest, the brain and spinal cord, and the pelvis.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for detailing that. I would love to know some ways you apply that in training, or maybe some ways you all plan to apply that in the courses.
Yeah, I'll address that. I'd be glad to. My name is Steve Moses. I am an owner and director of training of Palisade Training Group based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm also the customer support representative for the Firearm Trainers Association, and I provide content to CCW Safe. I've been a defensive firearms trainer for 30 years now. Over that time, I've managed to go ahead and as a reserve, I became a deputy constable. I was in a unique position in which I found myself being a plank member on the 1st Special Response Team. So I got to do some high-risk writs of possession and door kicking that most reserves do not get to do. And I'm also a Level 4 personal protection officer. I've done quite a bit of executive protection. I trained the team in dignitary protection, which we provided close contact for several international luminaries such as Mexican President Vicente Fox and Colombian President Alvaro Uribe. I've also done close protection for the Dallas cheerleaders, and it wasn't nearly as much fun as it sounds. It was a lot of work, and I did it twice after saying I would never do it again. I'm a long-time student of training, and I have multiple instructor certifications, including all of the Range Master instructor certifications. I have always been kind of interested in what it takes to defend yourself in an effective manner. It stemmed from a break-in that occurred right after I got into college when I caught a burglar armed with a flathead screwdriver in my house. Required some room clearing on my part, held him at gunpoint, and reflected afterwards that everything that I did was tactically unsound, and it was a wonder that I didn't get myself killed. So that's what kind of kick-started me off on this particular journey. I've always felt like, or something that we always taught, is there are two ways to stop someone that is at that time actively trying to seriously injure or kill you, and that was to either affect a physiological or psychological stop. Now, my understanding is that at about 90% of the time, a psychological stop is what is what it'll do, with that simply being is the guy didn't want to be there any longer. He didn't want to be shot at. He didn't want to be shot. He didn't want to be shot anymore. Multiple reasons people have a strong survival instinct, but there are a few instances in which you have a motivated, dedicated attacker, whether it is maybe a terrorist, whether domestic or foreign, that came and knows they're going to die, or in some instances, which this is something we always had concerns about, was the suicide by cop, as well as that estranged husband or boyfriend that has no intention of coming out this alive, but he is going to kill that partner of his that he felt like did him wrong, and he's not going to stop. And in those instances, we're going to have to afford that physiological stop. And the best way to look at this is that I always want to be prepared for this is going to be one of those physiological stops as opposed to a psychological stop. It's also very important to realize that the attacker, that's the one that starts, and actually that's the one that stops what's going on. That is, I can't do anything until he or she does something, and as soon as he or she is no longer basically a risk to my health, then I need to stop shooting that person right then. So in a lot of instances, people will say, well, do I need to shoot him 2 rounds? Is it 4 rounds to the body, 2 rounds to the head? Well, I think what's really critical is to understand how we function, what allows us to function, and what needs to be targeted if we want to shut that down. And rather than say, okay, I'm going to fire this number of shots, if I have to stay in the fight, I'm going to keep targeting that area, that desired area, until such time that I don't need to shoot this person anymore. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that we definitely don't want to get shot. So what happens when somebody is shooting at us? Well, we tend to move. Well, the reverse is true. And so that person is not going to just stand there and let us shoot at them. And also, they are a 3D target. That is, they may be squared up. They may be angled this way. They can change angles. So if I need to shoot that person, how do I do that? And so that's where the shooting with X-ray vision or 3D approach to defensive shooting comes in, is understanding, okay, where do I need to shoot that person? And equally important, where does that bullet need to exit? If I know where that bullet needs to exit and I'm shooting that person with, I want to drive it through there, then my chances of shutting this person down quickly and to a certain extent, even more humanely, I think, are greater. So what we wanted to do is develop a system in which we could get this critical information out there, which you can see that Chuck and Andy and Troy are all going to be able to do. And then we want to take them to the range and we want to show them, okay, this is what that desired area, that upper part of the mediastinum where you have the upper spine, you have the heart, you have the superior aorta, vena cava, great vessels, all of that, where that's actually located. And we're going to practice shooting that. Okay, now once we've done that, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and put it into, okay, where are those areas going to be under a t-shirt? And then once we've done that, well, what happens when we have a 3-dimensional target? How do we angle those particular targets in such a way that it forces me to decide where I need to shoot this person if I want to be that bullet to be effective? And then lastly, what we do in our particular block is we do one in which it's kind of a, I'll just say it's a rip-off of what John Holston teaches in his applied defensive handgun, is there's a time element. So my partner, Alan McBee, says it's not really 3D. He says it's 4D because time is an element. So what that simply means is you need to be able to get on that quickly, and when you need to get your foot off the gas and on the brake, you need to do that quickly too. So we actually use laser spotters in which you will engage the target when the laser is on, and as soon as the laser goes off, you need to stop ideally within a half second or less, which takes into consideration that the person may have taken an action which may have been they moved and I need to shift my aim, or the person dropped the gun, surrendered, or whatever. And so we're going to kind of do this in a situation, not in a situation, but do this in an environment where it all makes sense to you, and then provide additional information, based upon Chuck being able to tell us about some of the gunfights he's aware of, some of the examinations that he's done when he's done investigations, what Andy has done in terms of treating people, things that you would think would have never shut somebody down, and things you would have said, there's no way this person's ever going to walk out, and they did. So we're hoping that we can get all this together so that people walk away and say, wow, I wish I had taken this course the very first time I started training. So that's our ultimate objective.
Absolutely. Well, I'm already feeling that way, so I can say that I know I will feel that way the day of the course. I've
got a question to add to Steve.
Please.
One of the benefits of the 3D targets is changing the way you think. You asked earlier about target selection. When we train on the range, we're using a 2-dimensional target that is facing a squared on. But in a actual encounter, you would never on the range shoot past the nipple towards the lateral side. But depending on how the body's turned, that may be the ideal place. So being able to identify where the structures are as the body is turning in space is important. That's when the 3D targets bring out.
Absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, what are the targets made of? I'm trying to visualize this. Is it the ballistic gel?
Well, we use ballistic gel at the very end. Chuck will do that when he demonstrates, what these carry, handgun caliber rounds can do. The targets, you'll see basically, you may see nothing more than an IDPA target with a little 4.5 by 11-inch slit of paper that has the spine, the heart, the, aorta, the vena cava, the great vessels on it. We'll also use some birchwood Casey targets. They're relatively inexpensive, kind of 3D-ish cardboard targets and everything that gives it a little bit of depth in which you can put those on there, paint them black, put your tactical anatomy target behind it, and engage that, and then see, I hit on this person. Did it get in there and get to where I wanted? All the way to these hard plastic 3D action targets. They cost about $100. It's about, it's a little bit greater than a half torso. That includes a head and basically, pretty close down into the pelvis area and everything. And you can literally put T-shirts on these and then turn these guys around at different angles. So, and then Andy, you've got another system that you use, I think. Could you describe that?
Yes, I use a plastic model that you'll see in a clothing store that's used to display shirts, blouses, etc. But it's a three-dimensional target, and once you put a T-shirt on it, since bad guys don't wear shirts to say "insert bullets here," just putting a T-shirt over a target, you'll be surprised how your accuracy changes, because you lose your visual cues of the bullseye. But like I said, bad guys don't wear shirts to say "insert bullets here," so you've got to be able to, once again, visualize using the external anatomy where you need to hit.
That makes total sense. I recently had to shoot my first USPSA match with, I'm not saying that that USPSA is I'm not trying to introduce that argument here, but just to the point of changing that cue, we had the plastic bags over them to protect them from the rain. And it was surprising how much that affected my ability to put shots on target accurately. It was very humbling, So yeah, I can see how that would apply to a target with a T-shirt. So cool. That's good to know.
And the other thing too, is it makes us aware of where we're vulnerable also. And so, everything that is true in terms of a threat is also true in terms of us. And so in many instances, something that you have to convince your student is that your goal is not to win a gunfight. Your goal is to not get shot. And if that includes you never taking a shot, indeed, that is a winner. But we're also going to go ahead and take into consideration that there is a reasonable possibility that you might get shot. And so you've got 3 of these guys here that are just outstanding at teaching, immediate action, treatment of gunshot wounds. But I tell you what, when you're trying to put a tourniquet on yourself or a chest seal and you've never contemplated, it seems like it should be easy, and it's really not that easy. And then indeed you even have the equipment, because a lot of people that talk, really tough talk about, I carry all this equipment, I have it with me all the time. Well, the question is, do you really have at least some minimalist equipment on you all the time, and why that might be a good idea to perhaps add that to what you carry on your everyday basis?
Absolutely. If you don't mind, before we move on to responding first aid to a situation like this, I would love to know how important you all think it is, and anyone can pick this question up, to train off of, I think people kind of refer to it as like training off of the X. Is that when it comes to practicing draws?
Using movement?
Yes, using movement in your dry fire and live fire training. How important would you all say that is?
We teach that in every single class. We teach that in every single class. However, in this particular class, our focus is just going to be on tactical anatomy and what do I have to do in order to identify it, get myself in a proper angle where I can make that hit, and then make those hits where they need to be.
So would you say that it's best to learn tactical anatomy and that application while standing stationary, and then progress? One form of progression from that would be to move off of the X?
Well, I think so. Especially, we've only got 2 days to do this. We've got a lot of material. This is the most critical material, and everything else, at least in my opinion, that should be in a defensive class or a fighting class or whatever you want to call it.
And the other thing is that you don't want to overwhelm the student. And so Steve and I are both teaching a 3D approach to handling problems, but we both reinforce each other. The more things you add, the easier it's going to be to become overwhelmed. So I think I agree. Learn this, go to another class to learn your tactics, and keep training.
Absolutely. Keep training. I like that. I was thinking about that the other day, how, we will perform like we practice. So, I would think at this point, I have so many reps, or all of my reps have just been done, the majority, let's say 95% of them. And it's okay. I'm admitting it. I'm at least acknowledging it. They've all been done, when I'm going out to dinner and I'm dry firing in my outfit from the stationary position. Well, thank you all for explaining that. It makes total sense. You don't want to overwhelm the students. I'm pretty good at doing that myself as an instructor, the overwhelming part. So it's always a good reminder. And it sounds like that can be something that someone can work on down the road. Attention all knife enthusiasts. Today's episode is sponsored by the one and only Cold Steel Knives. For over 3 decades, Cold Steel has been leading the way in the knife industry, dedicated to creating the world's strongest and sharpest blades. They've pioneered countless innovations that have become industry hallmarks of quality and sophistication. From their revolutionary checked Kraton handles to the iconic Tonto point blade systems, Cold Steel's progressive accomplishments have set new standards in the field. Their trademark triad locking mechanism remains unrivaled by any of their competitors, proving its unbeatable performance time and time again. Their impressive lineup goes beyond just knives. They offer swords, tomahawks, machetes, cutlery, and a wide range of tools for everyday carry. Trusted by military, law enforcement, emergency services, self-defense professionals, and martial arts practitioners, Cold Steel is renowned for quality, strength, reliability, and dependability. Where strength, safety, and performance come together for over 3 decades and counting. Use code SHESHIELD20, that's SHESHIELD 20, again, SHESHIELD20 at checkout.